This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
We are inching ever closer to the start of the 2024 NBA Finals. I feel like we've been talking about this matchup for a week already, but we are getting closer to game number one as the Dallas Mavericks take on the Boston Celtics. The Celtics, not surprisingly, heavy favorites over at FanDuel Sportsbook, but hey, it's a tighter series than what we've had so far throughout the East. So we're going to break down the NBA Finals by talking to Tom Vecchio, getting his read on the series prices, his thoughts on how these two teams match up, and thoughts on game number one as well. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as mentioned by Tom Vecchio. Check him out on X at Tom_Vecchio1. Find his work over at FanDuel Research, and of course in the Solo Shot, talking MLB betting and DFS every Monday and Tuesday. Tom, happy NBA Finals to you. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I think we are in for an awesome series. There's obviously a lot of storylines between the two teams, or I should say between the players on the teams, which certainly
between the fans on the teams, you know,
certainly brings the level of excitement, which I think it's good. Like it's good to have this, but let's get the games going already.
Yeah, it's been a hot second for sure. I understand it from a scheduling perspective, but we get an extra week to hear people talk about Kyrie in Boston, Porzingis and Dallas, and apparently that's maybe more of a storyline than I thought it was. Porzingis' health, obviously, a storyline as well. So a lot to discuss, even besides just the narratives. We'll dive into all that here with Tom throughout the day for today. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Big week here on the show because we have a preview of the Belmont Stakes coming up tomorrow with Christina Blacker of FanDuel TV. She'll swing by, break down her thoughts on the field for Saturday's race. Then Tom is back with us on Thursday to preview the Stanley Cup Finals as well. So a lot of good stuff here coming up throughout this week on Covering the Spread. Search for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe, and if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating and review as well. NBA Finals are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the action with FanDuel, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 used on same-game parlays, live bets, championship futures, and so much more. There is no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Not available in North Carolina. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Colorado, DC, Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Vermont, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. 1-800-522-4700. Visit chaosgamblinghelp.com in Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghealth.org in Maryland. 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia. 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Now, Tom, we'll talk the series prices here in a second, but first, I want to get your overall view of this series, because the Mavericks able to mow through the Wolves, looked really good in the conference finals. The Celtics mowed through everyone, both regular and postseason. So how do the Mavericks match up with this Celtics team?
I think it's good. I think it's a good matchup. In terms of the bodies that they can throw in the middle, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, they got Maxi Kleber back. They've shown the ability to, use them to neutralize big men, which we saw with Karl Anthony Towns. Bunch of slow games for him. Of course, he's bound to have a big game here or there, but they can neutralize big men, and they also can clog up the middle, which prevented, I should say, Anthony Edwards from being able to drive and get to the basket. And if they can do that where they can clog up the middle and prevent Tatum and Brown from driving to the basket, that means other players are going to have to step up and knock down threes, which is something the Celtics have been very good at this season. They take a ton of threes. They knock down a ton of threes, especially at home. That's why they get, wherever the stat was this year, X amount of games won by 30 plus points. They just knock down threes at an extremely high clip. So I think it does present opportunities for some of the role players to step up and have some big games. But from a match perspective, I like the way the Mavs are built in order to limit big men, but also limit wing players, Tatum and Brown, driving to the middle.
Now, you talked about the secondary players or tertiary players on the Celtics team. And obviously, a part of that depends on the health of Kristaps Porzingis. But when you're looking at those role players, you said that they've been able to do this for a long time. Is that sustainable? Can those tertiary options on the Celtics team continue to put up the numbers they've done so far?
I think so, and it's going to come down to very specific props for, I would say, basically two key players. And my overall take for the series, which we can get into in a little bit, has a lot to do with Porzingis' health. Mm-hmm. And then it would point me to Derek White, it would point me to Al Horford for certain things. So Porzingis' health is basically I don't want to say like the linchpin of how I view this series unfolding, but it is a very, very key factor.
Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second as well. But let's talk about the Celtics, because you discussed the health of Porzingis, but health has been a big story for the Celtics opponents too. And I think this storyline's gotten a lot of talk already, where the Celtics have benefited for sure from their opponents being without their star players. And I guess so what I would say to that is that they were also like minus 1,000 or minus 2,000 to win those series before the injuries occurred. So like, it's not the reason they're here, but does the Celtics road to the finals factor into your thought process here at all?
Not really.
Yeah.
They've just been such a good team overall. If Donovan Mitchell was healthy with the Cavs, do they win one or two more games? Sure. If Halliburton was healthy, do they win one or two more games in this? Yeah, sure. The Pacers would win some of those games. Maybe they close it out, et cetera, et cetera. I still expected them to win those series, even if everyone was fully healthy. So it happens. Everyone's like, oh, they're holding it against the Celtics. Oh, they played these teams that weren't healthy. Like, it happens. They don't choose that. And it is what it is. They're still the better team compared to every matchup they had. They were the better team, regardless of who was there.
Right. Exactly. And that was in place before the injuries occurred. So they did benefit, but that's not the reason that they are here. So let's talk about this series. Right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, the Celtics are minus 220 to win the finals, with the Mavs at plus 184. So let's start with that market specifically, Tom. Any interest to you in betting either the Celtics or the Mavs at that price?
I have a slight interest in the Mavs at plus 184. I think it's super thin. If you could be closer to 2-1, I'd have a bit more interest. And this is where my Porzingis health note about the series comes into play. So this is one of my overall takes from the series, and this is how I'm building the narrative of how I'll be approaching series props and all these things. Porzingis is expected back for game one. Expected, not fully official. If Porzingis comes back, is he 100%? That's my main question. Is he operating at 80%? Is it 75%? Whatever it is. Ultimately, the Celtics don't have the time to work through the kinks in the offense to get him fully back in the swing of things. So if he's not able to go at 100% and he's inefficient because he's just at 80%, or the Mavs defense, which is good at shutting down big men, which we saw with Cavs, he may hit a lot of unders on his props. And if he's hitting a lot of unders, that leads me to Derek White scoring and Al Horford with rebounds. And if he's being inefficient, it also leads me to, I think that increases the variance. If they're giving the ball to him, they're essentially wasting possessions. That will increase the variance, and I think that puts the edge in favor of the Mavs. So if now on the other side of that, if Porzingis is fully healthy, ready to go, that's a completely different story.
Right.
So we have to build these narratives, because we can't be taking the Mavs on this and then the Celtics on this and then 4 games on this. We have to have everything correlated. So I do like the Mavs at plus 1.5 on the series spread more than the Mavs straight up. If the number was longer for the Mavs on the series straight up, that's where I would take them. So the Mavs plus 1.5 at minus 134 is my favorite bet of anything in this series.
Yeah, as you mentioned, that's in the series spread at FanDuel Sportsbook. The Mavericks plus 1.5 games is minus 134. And that gets you a win if the Mavericks win this series outright, but also if it winds up going to 7 games. You get both those outcomes as being victories for you here. And I think that that's especially enticing if you think that Porzingis, there's a possibility he doesn't play game 1. Like, it might not be a huge possibility, but also if he's ineffective, you can kind of get a couple of things in there. Now, let's say that Porzingis is unhealthy. He's playing, but he's not effective. How do you think that Boston matches up with the Mavericks if we make that assumption around Porzingis?
They just have to revert back to what they did with their rotations in the last few series, which I think may actually put them at a disadvantage because, when we saw Siakam and Miles Turner for the Pacers, that's certainly good. But when they can throw PJ Washington, Derek Jones, Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, and now Maxi Kleber, who's back, that's a lot of big men they can throw out there and kind of wear down the Celtics, and especially Al Horford, who doesn't play an insane amount of minutes just because he's getting up there in age. Luke Cornett is not a player we need to be super worried about. Xavier Tillman coming off the bench. The Celtics are just a step thinner when it comes to big men if Porzingis isn't fully ready to go. So that's where I'm kind of factoring in some of this variance. Like, if he's not healthy, he can't be out there for 35 minutes and just wasting possessions. And then the Mavs don't have to worry about him on defense. Then they can clog the lane and shut down Tatum and Brown. And like, all this gets compounded and starts snowballing in favor of the Mavs. Right. So we have to build things in the same direction, essentially.
Okay, so Tom is taking the Mavericks plus 1.5 games, minus 134 at FanDuel Sportsbook due to some potentially increased volatility given the uncertainty around Porzingis' health. Now, that also could play into the MVP betting. Right now, Jason Tatum is a favorite. He is minus 125. Luka Doncic 2-1. Jaylen Brown 7-1. Kyrie Irving down to 20-1 to an NBA Finals MVP. When you look at this market, Tom, anybody stand out to you here?
I think there's a smidge of value on Brown right now, and it's thin. Obviously, Tatum is the favorite. He's been the favorite, I think, since the playoffs started. He was the favorite to win the MVP. But when I'm looking at this, it's the same take I had about Brown coming into the Eastern Conference Finals when I spoke about Brown on some other NBA hits that I've done, where while Tatum may average more points and more rebounds, more assists, if Brown has big shots as he did at the end of game 1, forcing overtime, like, those are impactful, game-winning, series-winning type of plays that make the MVP, make him more valuable for the MVP. Regardless if Tatum averages more points, you say, okay, how did they win this game? They won this game because Brown making these big shots. So when we're looking at the Celtics, and you can say the same thing about the Mavs in terms of Kyrie, the odds suggest that it's like a number 1 and a number 2, when it's really like a 1A and 1B scenario for both of these teams. So if you have interest in Kyrie, there's a case to be made that he has these big performances alongside Luka that the odds suggest that he's like 2 steps behind him. So I have a smidge of interest in Brown just because I do think the Celtics will win, but I don't want to be laying minus 125. I want to take a little bit of a longer shot because he has shown the ability to make these impactful plays.
Right now, Jaylen Brown, as you mentioned, 7-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Kyrie's at 20. How long would that number need to get before you actually are willing to pull that trigger?
It would have to be closer to 25 or 30-1. Okay. 20 is a little bit too low. If the Mavs win, it's going to be because of Luka. Yeah. But again, the odds would suggest otherwise. The odds would suggest it's Luka and then everyone else on the roster, when that's really not the case.
Okay, so monitor Kyrie. If you can get him closer to 25 or so, maybe interest there. But for right now, Jaylen Brown, the one slight value in this market for Tom to win NBA Finals MVP. We do have the markets for game 1 already set at FanDuel Sportsbook, where the Celtics are favored by 6, and the total for this game is 214. So focusing on game 1 specifically, Tom, any bets stand out to you there?
If Porzingis gets officially ruled in and that number gets to 7.5, 7.5 might be a little bit of a stretch, but if it gets to 7, that's where I have interest in the Mavs. For the totals tonight, I think, or not tonight, but on Thursday, I think that's fine. I will say 1 or 2 of the first 3 games is probably going to go over by a good margin. After that, it's all about taking the unders. So I'm very hesitant on the unders early, but once that one big game happens, it's all unders the rest of the way there. When it comes to player props for this game 1, I have interest in 2, and it's building along the same lines of the narratives I spoke about with Porzingis. Porzingis under 6.5 rebounds. That's the initial spot that I want to go. My thought process is that's sitting at minus 140. My thought process is they want to get him involved in the offense, and him crashing the boards for every single rebound is probably not their number one priority. That's why they have the other players there. You can look to Al Horford. You can look to Drew Holiday and Tatum and Brown doing their thing. But Porzingis crashing the boards on every single rebound doesn't seem like the ideal path to throw him out there in his first game in weeks. So Porzingis under 6.5 rebounds. And then turning to Derek White, over 13.5 points, sitting at -130. And again, these are kind of correlated where if I'm not expecting Porzingis to be fully healthy, White is a proven playoff performer. Looking back last year versus the Heat in the conference finals and 2 years ago versus the Warriors in the NBA finals, he's a player that has stepped up and pushed past 20 points. It's not on an every game basis, but he can knock down threes. And I also think if Brown and Tatum are going to be driving the lane, that space is going to be available for Derek White to knock down those threes, as we've seen all season. They drive the lane, they kick it out. Not surprised defenses are worried about Tatum and Brown. Someone's going to be left open, and Derek White has really been a beneficiary of that, not just this season, but over the past 2 years in the playoffs.
Yeah, White's market right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, 13.5 points is -130. The Porzingis rebound prop under 6.5 rebounds is -140. And I think this is a good spot to consider looking at a same game parlay, because these two bets are correlated, but they're not as obviously correlated as, like FanDuel obviously works on like an engine that says like, oh, okay, these two markets are correlated, so we want to make sure we account for that in the odds. It's important to find spots where there is correlation, but it might not be as obvious. And, I think that they know that these are somewhat correlated, because if you parlay those two together, it's +183 for the White over 13.5 points and Porzingis under 6.5 rebounds. But like, try to find spots like that where they are correlated, but you're not paying a massive correlation tax in order to pair them together. There is an incentive to get that correlation because you want to make sure things mesh well together. You want to increase the odds of all legs hitting if you assume that one leg hits and stuff like that. But this one to me is a bit less obvious to like an engine, an engine trying to find the correlation between bets. It might not be as skilled at picking up these two bets are correlated if we assume that maybe Porzingis is not going to be 100% healthy as he comes back off this injury. So you could potentially same game parlay them together with White over 13.5 points and Porzingis under 6.5 rebounds, +183 for the SGP on those two.
Right.
Any final thoughts, Tom? Go ahead.
No, I would say you can use that theory for anything. I would also circle back to the series prices and the total games. And this is regardless of what sport, whether, once baseball rolls around, if you expect a team to win by, and cover the series spread at -1.5, that should point you in a direction for total games. That should point you in a direction for direct outcome of, if you think the Celtics cover, that means they're going to be winning the series either 4-2 or 4-1. It's not going to be a sweep. At least I hope it's not a sweep. Just want to see good action. But, you can look at the Mavs +1.5, which means the series may be going 7 games. So you could also look to find some correlation there. Obviously, you can't parlay them. Right. But we're looking at, separate bets at finding different things that are aligned, as I said.
Yeah, the 7-game series price +190 at FanDuel Sportsbook, and there you win if it's either the Mavs or the Celtics who win that series. But again, by taking the Mavericks +1.5 at -134, you also win if they win in 6, if they win in 5. So there are advantages to both markets, but kind of going through the full menu and saying, okay, here is my assumption. Here's where I think is value. You like the Mavs +1.5. Check out all the other available markets to make sure there's not a better way to bet that. I think the Mavs +1.5 is the right way to do that personally. Just my personal opinion though. But kind of dig into those markets and identify whether there is a better route to do that, because when there's so much attention like this, so many markets, there are a lot of ways you can play things for sure. That is Tom Vecchio. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at Tom_Vecchio1. You can find him over on the FanDuel Research Podcast feed every Monday and Tuesday, talking MLB betting and DFS as well. Tom, I mentioned happy NBA Finals, but also happy Dinger Tuesday to you. Good luck with your bets. We'll talk to you again soon.
That's right. Thanks for having me. I'll be back on Thursday.
Breaking down the Stanley Cup Finals. That will be a lot of fun. As mentioned tomorrow, Belmont Stakes preview with Christina Blacker as well. I am on X at Jim Sonis. You can also find FanDuel Research on X at FanDuel Research. Don't forget to find the show on the FanDuel YouTube page and FanDuel TV Plus as well. Thank you all for tuning in, and good luck to you with your bets. And we'll talk to you once again tomorrow to break down the final race of the Triple Crown. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.